rumors that you tried to pass gas in her direction. You licked her leg.
Yeah, I wrote that.
You licked her leg while she was filming a love scene with Nicholson. Was any of that true?
The set of Terms of Endearment looked calm on camera, but behind the scenes, two of Hollywood's strongest personalities were colliding in ways no one dared talk about. And now, at 91 years old, Shirley MacLaine has finally named the co-star who pushed her patience, her discipline, and her professionalism to the limit. The stories that surfaced paint a picture far more chaotic than anyone imagined, and it all started the moment these two women walked onto the same set. When filming began on Terms of Endearment, the crew expected tension. They just did not expect it to come from the leading women themselves. Shirley MacLaine arrived with the same presence she carried throughout her entire career. She was polished, steady, and confident, with decades of experience behind her. People who worked with her often said she was predictable in the best way. She showed up prepared. She knew every angle of the script. She valued silence, focus, and control. Debra Winger, on the other hand, came in like a spark with no off switch. She was young, incredibly gifted, and fully aware of the buzz surrounding her rising career. Directors loved her intensity, but they also knew it came with a kind of emotional wildness that made each day on set feel like a gamble. One moment she was charming and playful, and the next she was diving so deeply into her character that no one around her could guess what mood she would surface in. Her approach was raw and unfiltered, and to many, that was part of her appeal. But to others, it was overwhelming. From the first table read, people could sense an uneasy balance forming between the two actresses. MacLaine's calm energy clashed instantly with Winger's impulsive rhythm. There were moments when MacLaine would sit quietly, reviewing her lines or reflecting on a scene, while Winger paced the room or made loud jokes that cut through the air. Some crew members later said the two women felt like they were operating on different frequencies entirely. Still, professionalism held everything together in the early days. No one wanted to believe that the film's emotional depth would be overshadowed by behind-the-scenes turmoil, but even then, small signs began to show. A few assistants noticed MacLaine stepping away from conversations with Winger more often than usual. Others caught Winger watching MacLaine with a kind of mischievous curiosity, almost as if she wanted to see how far she could push the older star. It was clear that this was not going to be an ordinary pairing, and it did not take long before the first real crack appeared, one that revealed just how unstable things were about to become. But that was only the beginning, because the early warning signs were far stranger than anyone expected. The first signs of real trouble slipped through the cracks quietly, almost like whispers floating around the set. Nothing explosive yet, but enough for the crew to start exchanging looks behind the cameras. People who worked those early weeks later said the atmosphere felt charged, as if something was building beneath the surface long before the headlines ever caught on. Debra Winger had a habit of testing the emotional temperature of a room. Some days she arrived overflowing with energy, laughing loudly and talking to everyone within reach. Other days she showed up withdrawn, tense, or already irritated before the lights were even set. She believed that unpredictable emotion made her performances stronger, but it also left the people around her feeling like they were walking through a storm cloud they could not predict. Shirley MacLaine, meanwhile, tried to stay grounded. She kept her distance, focused on her lines, and maintained her usual calm. But even she could not ignore the shifting mood that seemed to follow Winger everywhere. At times, Winger interrupted rehearsals with sudden bursts of improvisation. She changed the tone of scenes without warning. She pushed emotional boundaries in ways that made the crew stop what they were doing and just watch. There was one early moment that made people realize the tension was more than just a personality mismatch. During a rehearsal, Winger delivered a line with such unexpected aggression that MacLaine paused, blinked, and slowly asked if they were still running through the scripted version. Winger shrugged, saying she wanted to shake it up. MacLaine later told friends it felt less like artistic freedom and more like a deliberate challenge. Still, neither actress confronted the other. They were too professional for that. Instead, the conflict simmered, growing in small ways that outsiders never saw. A quiet sigh from MacLaine when Winger made another spontaneous choice. A smirk from Winger when MacLaine tried to bring the scene back under control. A few crew members began keeping an eye on doorways before stepping inside. hoping to avoid walking into an argument waiting to happen. And yet, even with all these early warning signs, no one could have predicted the moment that finally pushed their tension into open conflict. It was strange, unexpected, and so outrageous that decades later, people still talk about it as the turning point. And that moment, it arrived with no warning at all, and it changed the entire tone of the set. The moment that broke the tension wide open did not come from a dramatic argument or a heated exchange of insults. It came from something so unexpected, so out of line, that several crew members stood frozen, unsure if they had really witnessed it. During a break between scenes, Shirley MacLaine was sitting in her chair reviewing her notes. Keeping to herself as usual, Deborah Winger walked past her, paused for a split second, and then deliberately passed gas in MacLaine's direction before walking away without a word. No one laughed. No one spoke. The sound technician lowered his equipment slowly. A makeup artist covered her mouth. It was the kind of moment that felt almost surreal, like a bizarre prank you would expect from a rebellious teenager, not from a respected actress on a major film set. MacLaine looked up, stunned, and the silence that followed was sharper than anything either woman had said out loud. People on set knew Winger had a reputation for unpredictable behavior, but this was something different. It crossed a line MacLaine had drawn decades earlier in her career: respect. Even if the act was meant as a joke, it carried a message, and that message hung in the air heavier than the moment itself. Tension rose quickly after that. The cast and crew sensed the shift immediately. Conversations became shorter. People who once stood between the two actresses during rehearsals began taking a step back. Assistants quietly adjusted schedules so the women spent less downtime in the same room. But the uneasy energy only grew stronger. Then came the shouting match. It happened late in the afternoon, during a scene that demanded emotional weight. Winger pushed her performance to a new level, raising her voice and stepping closer to MacLaine in a way that felt less like acting and more like a challenge. MacLaine tried to continue the scene, but something about the moment struck a nerve. She set her script aside and confronted Winger directly. The two exchanged words that echoed across the set, sharp, loud, and fueled by weeks of simmering frustration. The director tried to intervene, but the argument had already taken control of the room. A few crew members stepped out of sight, not wanting to be pulled into the conflict. Others looked down at the floor, pretending to adjust equipment that did not actually need adjusting. After several tense minutes, production halted early for the day. Whispers spread quickly. Some people believed Winger was pushing boundaries to strengthen the emotional realism of the film. Others thought she simply enjoyed provoking MacLaine. Whatever the truth was, the atmosphere of the set had changed completely. Every person there could feel it. And as intense as that day was, the real explosion happened once the cameras stopped rolling for good, because the feud followed them long after filming ended, straight into one of the most competitive award seasons Hollywood had ever seen. And what happened during that awards season made the feud bigger than either of them expected. When filming wrapped, many hoped the tension would fade with it. But the feud did not dissolve. Instead, it stepped into the brightest spotlight in Hollywood. Award season Terms of Endearment was already gaining attention for its emotional impact, and critics praised both actresses for performances that felt unusually raw. What audiences did not know was that the crackling energy on screen came straight from the real-life friction behind it. The moment nominations were announced, everything shifted. Shirley MacLaine and Deborah Winger were suddenly competitors, both up for the same awards, both praised for entirely different strengths. MacLaine was recognized for her controlled, elegant performance. Winger was celebrated for her intensity and unpredictability. To the public, it looked like a respectful competition. Inside Hollywood, it felt like the beginning of a quiet storm. Reporters immediately saw an opportunity. Articles framed it as a generational face-off, the veteran versus the rising star. This only added fuel to a rivalry that had already reached its breaking point. At events, photographers tried to capture shots of the two actresses together. What they usually caught instead were stiff smiles or carefully maintained distance. People at those events later said you could feel the coldness in the air whenever they stood in the same room. Then came the Academy Awards. Both actresses arrived expecting the night to be tense, but nothing prepared the room for the moment when Shirley MacLaine heard her name called for Best Actress. As she stepped onto the stage, she delivered a speech remembered decades later. And it was one line that made Hollywood buzz for weeks: "I deserve this." To the public, it sounded like a triumphant declaration from a woman who had worked for decades to reach this point. But backstage, whispers spread instantly. Was it a pointed jab at Winger? A final swipe in their long, tangled feud? MacLaine insisted for years that it was not directed at anyone, but most people who knew the history between the two actresses believed it carried a deeper message. Deborah Winger's reaction did not help quiet the rumors. She congratulated MacLaine, but the tension between them was impossible to hide. Insiders claimed she left the ceremony earlier than expected, avoiding the press frenzy surrounding the win. Others said she brushed off questions about MacLaine entirely, refusing to feed the speculation. But even with the awards handed out and the cameras turned away, the feud was far from over. For decades, neither actress spoke openly about what really happened, until Shirley reached an age where secrets no longer carried the same weight. And that is when everything changed. Because at 91, she finally said the one thing she had never dared to say before. For decades, Shirley MacLaine kept the details of the feud tucked away behind polite smiles and carefully worded interviews. She never denied there had been tension, but she also never revealed just how deep that tension ran. That changed when she reached 91. At that age, she no longer felt the need to guard every story or protect every memory. When asked about the most difficult person she ever worked with, she finally let her guard down in a way she never had before. She did not explode or rant. She did not deliver a dramatic confession. Instead, she spoke with a calmness that only comes with age, honesty, and a lifetime spent in the spotlight. She mentioned the challenges she faced during certain productions, and then, almost casually, she acknowledged that one co-star's unpredictable behavior made the experience far harder than the public ever realized. While she did not frame it as hatred, her tone left no mystery about who had pushed her patience to its breaking point. She described emotional chaos on the set and moments where she felt she was acting through a vortex of energy she could not control. She hinted that her co-star's wild swings between intensity and humor were not just quirky habits, they were disruptions that made each scene feel like a test. She spoke about arriving on set ready to work, only to find herself navigating a whirlwind of moods that shifted without warning. People familiar with the feud recognized the reference immediately. The stories matched everything whispered for years. The sudden outbursts, the unpredictable mood changes, the moments where professionalism bent under pressure. Even the more outrageous moments, the ones fans believed were exaggerated, now sounded far more plausible in the context of her gentle honesty. What surprised listeners most was not that she finally spoke about it. It was how she spoke about it. There was no bitterness in her voice, no anger left to hide. She spoke as someone who had lived long enough to see the humor in situations that once felt unbearable. She even admitted she could look back and laugh at the absurdity of certain moments, although she emphasized that the tension was very real at the time. The interviewer pressed lightly, asking if this particular co-star was the most difficult of her career. MacLaine hesitated for only a second before giving a small nod, the kind that says more than words ever could. At 91, she had nothing left to lose by speaking plainly, and that tiny gesture confirmed what many had suspected for years. Deborah Winger had been the storm that she endured, survived, and never truly forgot. Her reflection was not sharp or cruel. It was simply honest, an honesty that hit harder than any dramatic retelling ever could. And once her comments spread, people began revisiting old stories, resurfacing long-buried accounts, and realizing that the truth behind the feud might have been even more intense than anyone imagined. But the real shock came afterward, when the industry reaction revealed details that had never been spoken aloud until now. Shirley MacLaine's quiet admission at 91 rippled through Hollywood faster than anyone expected. It was not the kind of dramatic reveal that needed shouting or scandal. It was the calmness of her words that made people lean in, and behind the scenes, those who had stayed silent for years suddenly felt free to share what they witnessed during the making of Terms of Endearment. What surfaced painted a picture even more volatile than the rumors that circulated for decades. Former crew members began confirming details they had tiptoed around for years. One lighting technician said that the tension between the actresses was so intense that the air on set felt charged, as if scenes were being filmed inside a storm. Another crew member admitted that whenever they saw Winger marching across the set with that look in her eye, people subtly stepped aside, quietly hoping to avoid the next confrontation. Some even revealed that there were moments when the director paused filming, not for technical reasons, but because the energy in the room had become too unstable to capture anything usable. Industry insiders also noted that Winger's reputation did not start or end with terms of endearment. MacLaine's comments reopened discussions about Winger's history of disputes on other sets. Stories resurfaced about sudden arguments, emotional breakdowns, and unpredictable behavior that frustrated directors and co-stars alike. Even those who admired her talent admitted that working with her could feel like navigating a minefield, never quite knowing which version of her would walk onto the set that day. MacLaine's revelation also reignited public interest in the film itself. Viewers returned to terms of endearment, watching scenes with new curiosity. People claimed they could feel the tension through the screen, noticing moments where the friction between the actresses seemed to pulse beneath the dialogue. Fans compared their performances, debated who carried more emotional weight, and tried to guess which scenes were filmed during the height of their clashes. Entertainment shows and social media lit up with discussions, and clips of old interviews resurfaced. One popular moment that gained new attention was an old press junket, where MacLaine answered a question with a tight smile while Winger fidgeted in her seat beside her. At the time, people thought it was simple nerves. Decades later, with MacLaine's confirmation, viewers saw it in an entirely new light. Interestingly, Winger did not respond publicly to MacLaine's comment. Some insiders believed this silence was her way of avoiding further conflict. Others thought she simply did not care, having long moved on from the Hollywood landscape that once defined her. But her lack of response only added to the mystery, making the story feel like an unfinished chapter in a book both actresses chose to write on their own terms. Still, nothing overshadowed the fact that Shirley MacLaine, after a lifetime of diplomacy and silence, had finally spoken plainly. Her honesty did not start a new fight. Instead, it closed one. And for the first time, the world saw just how much restraint she had carried for all those years, and how much chaos she had endured beside a co-star who turned one of Hollywood's greatest films into one of its most unforgettable behind-the-scenes battles.
And that brought the decades-long feud to a close, not with a dramatic showdown, but with the simple power of truth spoken at the right time.